Good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock and welcome to UK Column Live. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio is Mike Robinson. And by live Skype link, we've got Patrick Henningsen in London. Are you there, Patrick?
I'm here, Brian. How are you doing?
Yeah, we're doing very well. Well, it's extraordinary that at the end of the world, we've managed to maintain communications with you in London. But as I've explained, we've had incredible events here in Plymouth. We've had fire and brimstone. We've got temperatures of over 1,000 degrees. We've had a tsunami come into the city of 2 miles high, but we're still here broadcasting. I think the damage is moving eastwards and will be in the London area by early this afternoon. That, of course, is a completely fictional report and in style with the BBC, but we'll be mentioning that later on. So the weather here in Plymouth, it's quite a clear day. We've got a bit of blue sky, a little bit cold, but not a bad ending for us anyway for 2012.
Yeah.
What have you got, Mike?
Right, we're starting with The Guardian, who is saying that Putin is not preoccupied with the fate of Assad. They're saying that the Russian president seems to indicate that Moscow now accepts that the Syrian leader's days are numbered. And this seems to be in contrast with Russia Today, which has been speaking to Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. And he's basically saying that Russia is not in the business of regime change. He's saying some of the regional players that they have been talking with have been suggesting, why don't you just tell President Assad to leave? We'll arrange for some safe haven for him. Well, we know that they don't particularly intend to have any safe haven for him, but really Russia's attitude to this is that they are more interested in the sort of long-term stability of the region. They're not really interested in the West's play acting and gamesmanship, brinkmanship with regard to Assad. So, Patrick, have you got any comments on that?
Well, there's a lot to discuss about Syria, but there's been a few major shifts in the last week. Firstly, the Washington, or President Obama, if you will, the figurehead who's the spokesperson in Washington, has said he's now taken sides with the Syrian opposition, but he's qualified it with there's good rebels and there's bad rebels. So they've now acknowledged the fact that there are bad rebels, and those are, in fact, the bad rebels that outnumber the good rebels, and also the ones that Washington and their NATO allies and their Gulf state allies have been backing from the beginning. So again, it's important, I think, that people are still able to read through the propaganda, which originally was seeded in the public domain as that there was a democratic reform movement in Syria, and that's what this rebellion is about. The fact of the matter is this reform movement is anything but pro-democratic or anything like this. It's a militarized, mercenary-based guerrilla army that has been funded from the outside and is being supported on many different levels from NATO and their allies. So they wanted to have a repeat of what they achieved in Libya, although it's much more difficult diplomatically to go in the fashion in which they did in Libya. That's requiring first a no-fly zone and then massive airstrikes, and to then weaken the structure, the security state, the state of Syria. But what's really interesting is the chemical weapon talking point has now come into the fore, and you know, looking at some of these YouTube videos with the Free Syrian Army terrorists showing off the fact that they might have chemical weapons and they're prepared to use them in some very nasty implications. So if anyone is going to use chemical weapons, it's not going to be the Syrian government. Obviously, that would be suicide if they would, because that would give the West a knee-jerk opportunity to go in and absolutely level the country. But the reports are there's a possibility that some of these chemical weapons that might be in the hands of the Syrian guerrilla rebels are from Libya. And one has to ask the question, how did they get from Libya to Syria? And these are ex-Gaddafi stockade arms weapon stocks. And also, you know, on a bigger scale, we talked about, you know, Putin and Lavrov. I think Russia's stance has been very consistent right the way through. and also the fact that Lavrov has highlighted a reality, which is that under the Assad government, ethnic minorities and religious minorities have enjoyed a safe haven in that country without the sort of pro-Islam, extreme Islamicist kind of doctrine that you've seen in other countries in the wake of the Arab Spring. Jews in Damascus are offered protection and have been for many, many decades under the Assad regime. So have Christians, and so have Kurds, and many others. So Syria is a nation state first, and it's anything else second. It's not an Islamic state. It's not part of a caliphate. But that is the plan the West has, is to basically topple the Assad regime and replace it with a more extreme Islamicist regime. And that will guarantee internal strife for many decades and with the neighbors as well. And if you look at this sort of change, also we have to say Syria's track record with regards to its neighbor Israel has been nearly immaculate since 1974. Syria has honored their peace treaty with regards to the Golan Heights ever since that time. So this whole campaign to characterize Bashar al-Assad as a tin pot dictator hasn't really worked very well, although they've really tried through the normal propaganda channels to do that. His track record doesn't show that, and also some of the interviews he's given have been incredibly articulate. But I think, and we can talk about this, Brian and Mike, is that what's happening here is we're seeing a return to Cold War power politics. And this is very different from the war on terror sort of narrative that's driven foreign policy from the West in the last decade. This is a new arena we're stepping into here.
Well, I'll just highlight this next article, which is from the New York Times, and it seems that they're getting more and more desperate to hang something around the neck of Assad. So now they're criticizing him for using Scud missiles against the rebels, or they're saying that that's what he's doing. And a senior State Department, the New York Times reporting that a senior State Department official said, we've been clear that we have seen the regime in Syria use Scud missiles against its own people, and that continues. But of course, most of the rebels aren't their own people.
Well,
yeah.
I would just add to this, to the comment at the moment, is that what I find very interesting is that we just do not see any form of proper factual evidence to support the claims that are actually being made in the media, whether it's in Britain or the US or internationally. The military, particularly the Americans, have got absolutely outstanding surveillance systems, so whether it's satellite photography or photographs on the ground, it would be so easy to actually produce the real information, the real evidence to show people that what they're saying is correct. So if they're saying that Scud missiles are being fired, I would like to see some actual irrefutable proof that's the case, because of course we know that we now know that the whole of the drive to start the violence in Iraq was supported by totally fictitious claims and doctored intelligence information, but at least they bothered to try and put some false intelligence information forward. Here, all we've got is that various media stations are making these wild claims off the back of a spokesperson. So I am highly suspicious, because they're talking chemical weapons, they're talking Scuds, they're talking this, they're talking that. Absolutely no evidence to back it up.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to just look back at when we, just before the no-fly zone resolution 1973 was implemented in Libya, you had the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. This is quite a high-level position, mind you, diplomatically. Susan Rice going in front of Security Council, making statements to the effect that Gaddafi was issuing Viagra pills to his soldiers to go out and rape the public. Now, you might find that ridiculous, but that was basically put out through all of the main newspapers and mainstream corporate media outlets, and those sort of lies, they do sway public opinion, whether they're ridiculous or not. This allows the public, softens up the public opinion so much so that when they do come with the big announcement, i.e. a no-fly zone and maybe troops on the ground, that they won't get the public backlash that they would have got without sort of putting those lies out. And so we've seen a series of lies. Well, we've seen the babies in incubator story rehashed for Syria only last year. So, and I wrote about that at the time. It's just a litany of mischaracterizations and false information. It's unbelievable, but thank God there are some sane media outlets out there that are sort of debunking some of these wild claims. And I'll even say the BBC was caught red-handed, mischaracterizing, using a photograph and attributing it to the Assad regime with regards to dead bodies, I believe, which I think you showed on this program earlier.
Yep.
Yeah, well, of course, we're going to come on to this because we wouldn't like to leave 2012 without mentioning the BBC.
Okay, next article then, moving on. Japan's next leader, this is from the Associated Press, I believe, originally. Japan's next leader wants freer rein for military, and what they're highlighting is that post-Second World War, Japan's been fairly limited in what it can do with its military, but Japan's new, they've just had an election, so Abe, their new Prime Minister, wants to get hand in glove with NATO and other military, in any military activity that NATO is getting involved in, and of course this is being dressed up as being the threat from North Korea that's causing this. I would say more likely the tensions between Japan and China, which these islands between Japan and China are being used to inflame tensions between Japan and China. Japan's clearly feeling a bit uncomfortable at the moment and has decided that it wants to get some of these restrictions lifted.
Yeah, well, the only other comment I'll make on that is that for me, we know the ultimate agenda of the international politics at the moment is the creation of the one world system of government, and of course that has to have a one world military system. So it's quite noticeable at the moment how there's an expansion effectively of the military capability of core participants, so America, China, Russia, Japan, obviously extremely important, but everybody wants to integrate and carry out these cross-party operations with everybody else. And of course what it is doing, region by region, is starting to bring military forces, I believe, into the ultimate aim, which is that there will only be one system of military force, and that will be controlled by one world government through the United Nations.
Well, we talked about that earlier in the week, didn't we? We've already got our defence pact with the French, and Cameron's also bringing us closer into Europe.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Easing.
More quantitative easing, this time from Japan. So moving on to economic stuff, the Bank of Japan has ramped up its money printing program, and you know, what can you say? That the policy doesn't change. More funny money appearing in the system. It isn't going to help.
Mention the system. Mention the amount: 10 trillion yen, which is about 732 million pounds. So
the move was described as good by senior officials who were quoted as saying it is necessary to use every possible means to boost growth. But of course what they're really talking about, the term boost growth has nothing to do with the economy, it's to do with the growth of the banking system, and their attempts to keep the banking system bubble inflated. Yeah. Okay, and back in this country then, we've got Andrew Tirry, who seems to be in a bit of conflict with George Osborne at the moment, has been for a while. He's the head of the Commission on Standards in Banking, and we've criticised this organisation for quite some time because they come up with the idea of ring fencing investment and retail banking and not full separation. Mr. Tirry seems to be getting a bit more bullish on this and is saying that when the legislation finally comes into force, that the ring fencing should be an electric fence, and they're basically suggesting that I think he is particularly keen to see a full break-up of the banks, and I think that he should just get on with it and push the government into doing that, rather than this kind of pussyfooting around the issue. Just get on with it. We need the banks broken up.
Yeah, will he be allowed to is the key thing. I think it's extremely unlikely. We've got a war going on, haven't we? We've got a war between corrupt international bankers, obviously, who print their own money, so they're pretty well funded to defend themselves and get their agenda in, and other people who are at the moment in the system who may be having the right thoughts, but have they actually got the strength of character and the strength of support to push things through? Until the public fully wake up and start to come in and support people who've got the right idea, we've got problems, which is why I think in 2013 this is where we need to get to. So people who say and suggest common sense remedies to what's happening, we need the public to get behind them.
Well, the Daily Mail also reported on this issue, and they were pointing out that Terry is suggesting that really there needs to be more prosecution of people that are doing naughty things in the financial system, and of course we would agree with that.
Starting with George Osborne.
Beginning with George Osborne, and you're absolutely right. I believe there is a war going on within the financial system. There are voices from within the banking community calling for a full Glass-Steagall style separation of the banks, and I think that the indications here are that Mr. Terry may agree with that, but doesn't really want to go that far just yet. So I think he needs to get the brakes off and go for it.
Yeah. And sorry, we got Wall Street coming up here, I think.
Right. So this is this business of the fiscal cliff, which we keep hearing about, and today the markets tumbled, according to the Telegraph, because Congress axed a vote on an agreement on the fiscal cliff. And just so that everybody knows what that is, it's basically the situation that in the new year the United States will have certain tax breaks expiring.
Yep.
At the same time, there'll be a new influx of tax increases and spending cuts, and they're all panicking that this is going to bring the United States back into recession, as if it's ever been out of recession. Interestingly enough, we have this report from Paul Craig Roberts, who is a former Assistant Secretary to the US Treasury. He was under President Reagan, and he was also a former Associate Editor of the Wall Street Journal. And he's basically making the valid point that the whole fiscal cliff argument is a diversion. It's a diversion from the issue of derivatives and various other financial instruments, the whole casino side of things. He's saying the problem from the standpoint of conventional economics with the fiscal cliff is that it amounts to a double-barreled dose of austerity delivered to a faltering and recessionary economy. And then he goes on to say, however, that it is a hoax in a sense. And he goes on to say, prior to financial deregulation, essentially the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act and the non-regulation of derivatives, a joint achievement of the Clinton administration and the Republican Party. And he gives some examples: Chase, Bank of America and Citibank were commercial banks that took depositors' deposits and made loans to businesses and consumers and purchased treasury bonds with any extra reserves. And then he says, with the repeal of Glass-Steagall, these honest commercial banks became gambling casinos, like the investment bank Goldman Sachs, betting not only their own money but their depositors' money on uncovered bets on interest rates, currency exchange rates, mortgages, the price of commodities and equities. And this is absolutely bang on. We've been talking about this at the UK column for a long, long time. The issue is the derivatives bubble, and that's the main issue in the financial system. That is not being addressed. Everybody's worried about this fiscal cliff, which is really a non-issue.
Of course, all of the media reporting is skewing it so that we don't look at this stuff, so we shall keep reporting it. But anything you'd like to say or add on that, Patrick?
No, I think it's, a question of common sense with regards to looking at the changes and the shifts in the financial world. Certainly, Bill Clinton's parting gift to the world was signing repealing the Glass-Steagall Act, in 1999, on his way out of office, nearly at the 11th hour. And, that was put in play during the Great Depression to prevent the very thing that we've experienced over the last few years. So, I really challenge our political leaders to identify some of these important touchstones and say there is a cause and effect relationship.
Yeah.
I know that's almost blasphemous these days to say that something might cause something else and actually apply logic to it, but it just opened the gates of hell financially, and we're reaping the the tragedy of it today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, also kind of economic in a sense, because obviously we know that the government has been using taxpayers' money in huge amounts to bail out banks, but on the converse side of that, they've also been trying to sell off national assets at a ridiculous rate. And this article in The Guardian is pointing out that they had the Port of Dover had been part of a package that they were trying to sell off, which included UK Air Traffic Control, Student Loans Company, and the Tote. So this was part of that. But there's been such an outcry about selling Dover because the likely buyer was going to be Calais. There's been such an outcry about an asset being sold to a foreign investor that they've had to back out of it.
Yeah, but I mean, how much evidence to people in the country does the general public want of treason by our own government? We've got a government that's not just selling off trains or rail track. They're actually now selling off land and strategic infrastructure in the country. To offer a strategic port to a foreign power, in my view, is treason. And they are so cocksure of themselves now that we've got these idiots in Westminster. It doesn't matter whether they're labelled blue and Conservative or yellow and Lib Dem or red and Labour. They are now so arrogant and sure of themselves that they're prepared to have a go at selling off, the main port areas. And of course, what many people have forgotten is over the last 10, 15 years, key strategic infrastructure like ports has been shut down. In many places around the country, dock areas have been infilled and covered with so-called executive homes, which are supposedly of great benefit to us. And then what they've really done is concentrated our ability to import goods through a few key ports. So this makes us, effectively puts a stranglehold on the country. But to say that you're going to sell off a whole port area to any country, but I think maybe they made a mistake by thinking that we could stomach the French. But since the French have now got control of the Royal Navy and the rest of the military, more longbowmen, I think, Mike.
One thing I'd like to add, Brian, is that when you start stripping state assets and selling them off to private interests, a lot of time the justification for this would be, hey, we need to raise money because we've got a budget shortfall, so we need to sort of identify things that we can flog off. Now, if you look at what they're actually getting for a sale of something as crucial and strategic as the Port of Dover, it's really chump change in the large scheme of things. And if you look at the amount of waste from the sort of local government level right up to the top, and also, I'm not even going to talk about bailing out the financial sector. There's no need at all to sell any state assets. But one would have to pose a question here, Brian, which is that at what point would someone be very keen to unload and sell off as many assets as they can if they had foreknowledge that possibly a new regime was coming in the future? Or that this system would collapse and that someone could make a short-term profit and the state could buy it back at pennies on the pound. I don't know. There seems to be someone has some knowledge behind the scenes of something that's going to happen that we're not privy to.
Well, you're putting that in a very polite and delicate way. For me, it's much easier. We have now got a criminal system embedded in Westminster. And these people are doing what they're doing, yes, because they can make a fast buck, but absolutely because they know that the overall agenda is to destroy this country as a nation state, so that we are absolutely imprisoned within this dictatorship called the European Union. So I don't think there's any guesswork in this. Cameron, Clegg and Miliband, they absolutely know what the agenda is. There's a cross-party political agenda running. They're all at it. They're all working together. And they absolutely know what they'd like to impose. I think the question for 2013 is, can we keep the speed of the wake-up of the British public going fast enough? Yeah. Because people are beginning to look at these people and say, we've got criminals in power, you know. I'm not you're being very polite where you're a guest on the show. I'm not that squeamish on the subject.
Right, I suppose we better speed along here because we want to get on to John Coles and other issues.
Indeed, yeah.
But yesterday, according to the Mail here, 100 newspaper proprietors, publishers and editors met to sign up to the principles laid out by Lord Justice Leveson, which is very interesting because it seems increasingly clear that the government actually doesn't have a clue what the outcome is actually going to be at the end of the day. So we've got Leveson's report. He's made some proposals. The press are signing up to those proposals, but the government doesn't know whether there's going to be statute behind it, whether there isn't, whether there's going to be a royal commission or whether it isn't. So it all seems a bit chaotic.
Well, I think there's a war going on. I think that exposure that the Mail and the Times and the Telegraph did, and I've got to come back to the subject of common purpose and Sir David Bell, I think that did some damage. But one of the things that people have been saying to us is that we very often sort of are quite kind about mainstream press and media. We're almost inferring that they are free, when of course all of the mainstream media is controlled to some extent by the people who own it. But I think that I'm going to say that the free press, and I consider us and a lot of other people in that, have now started to wake up individuals inside the mainstream newspapers, even inside the BBC, and they are beginning to put the pieces together. And I think there's a battle going on. Don't know whether you'd agree with that, Patrick.
Yeah, this is a very slippery slope right now that society is facing, and this is obviously a potential crisis of free speech here in Britain. But it's not just here in Britain. This is happening all over the sort of developed world, if you will. Particularly, we're talking about Europe and North America. But it's extremely chronic here, and if you look at the fact that, you know, the major newspapers and the major networks in a way form a kind of, they have a common interest as far as the cartel goes, because they have that market. And I've been told by people in Fleet Street, they said it's a myth to think there has been a free press in this country ever since the Profumo scandal in the early 60s. He said it's a myth. We only have the appearance of a free press in this country. And of course, with regards to Leveson, this is basically, I think you've documented it in detail, but it's a runaround. It's an opportunity to run around the legislative system. It's to run around law and use a statutory or administrative body to do things behind closed doors in order to regulate what information the public can have and what they cannot have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next we've got Plebgate, and this seems to be becoming a fairly insidious attack on the police, and you've got to ask the question, why is there an attack going on the police?
Well, I can answer that question very easily, because Andrew Mitchell said at the time that he'd effectively get the police. Okay.
Well, what's been interesting is that you know, we've got these two stories in the Telegraph and whatnot. Here we've got Andrew Mitchell has no confidence in the Met Police chief. Now, last last night before, can't remember which, on Channel 4 News, they were showing CCTV footage of Andrew Mitchell leaving Parliament on his bike and going out through the pedestrian exit. And they were telling us that, that this was CCTV footage from the night in question. But they didn't provide any evidence to show that that was in fact that was the fact. It could have been any night that Andrew Mitchell was leaving. And there seems to be a definite campaign against the police at the moment, and I was just wondering whether this is because there's certain sections of the police that are actually taking this whole paedophilia issue in Parliament quite serious.
Well, they're digging too deep.
They're digging too deeply. Yeah.
Well, could well be. I think, again, there is a war going on. I think that enough policemen have been unhappy for many years about some of the things going on inside the police force. We know certainly on the subject of child investigations, police that have been investigating paedophile rings then had their investigations closed down. I think there's scores to be settled, and really over the whole, even over the phone hacking thing, the battle lines are being drawn up. But I think, yeah, there's a war going on, and good people are finally standing up to be counted.
Right.
So my prediction is we're going to see more and more of this friction. But isn't it interesting how we get this turn? We get a man who is supposed to be an upstanding pillar of society, Andrew Mitchell. He admitted to using the bad language, so there wasn't a problem with that. But now, of course, he's the victim, and it's turned around, so a whistleblower in the police is the man who's caused the problem. We always see things turn on their head with these people in Westminster.
Well, it seems to me interesting that they could have, if this CCTV footage is genuine, they could have shown that the day after the reports came out in the press, and they could have put this all to bed at the time. But here we are a number of months later, and suddenly this CCTV footage is being broadcast, and you do have to ask the question, why didn't they just show that at the time, if that was the
Well, I think the agenda is with Leveson control of the press, and they, as one thing, they do not want whistleblowers of any form speaking out. So I think this is another attempt to crush whistleblowers. You get it wrong, and they're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks, basically.
Yeah, Brian, this is the trend we're looking at late 2012 to early 2013 is a war on whistleblowing. And, on an international level, this was achieved by, isolating and shutting down Julian Assange to a degree. What he is, is anyone's guess. But what they've done is target whistleblowers, basically. Bradley Manning in America and in this country. It's a war on whistleblowing. And if you look at the chief whip's spat with the police, what's really interesting here, if you look at any public opinion polls with regards to the approval rating of, let's say, the government, it's at an all-time low. And there's obviously many reasons for that, and mostly because of cover-ups, okay? And people have lost faith in their government by the droves, and that's why voter turnouts are very low as well. Now, if you look at the approval rating of the police, that's, to me, as far as living in a safe society or society based on a rule of law, the approval of public confidence in the police force is very important. So I would be very wary of politicians who are maybe, who knows what schemes and threats are going on behind the scenes with regards to this case, but it's a very damaging thing to take a political retribution line against the police, because as we know, these are people who have a very difficult job. I know some of them personally myself, and their job, they have the odds stacked against them on a daily basis. Budgets are being cut, the travel allowances are being cut, they're being moved around from department to department. And there's no continuity in the forces like maybe it was in the past. So to have the political body trying to undermine the public's confidence in the police, I'm very suspicious about that, because the political body needs the police to protect them as well. Well, so I see a major problem here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, BBC.
Okay, the BBC. This is incredible. BBC made such a big deal on Wednesday night, I believe it was. I was driving home, and the PM programme was on Radio 4. I listened to that on the way home, to just keep my driving safe, They were making such a big deal about this report and how people were resigning and other people were getting moved, and it turns out none of this is true. So here we have the fall guy, BBC executive who resigned after the devastating report on the Jimmy Savile fiasco, is now back at his desk. He earns £203,250 a year, and his boss, Helen Bowden, earns £354,000 a year for telling
£30,000 a month
for telling lies.
Yeah, for telling lies. But of course the government's got to back the BBC, because if you are going to impose a dictatorship, you need to have control of all press and media. The BBC clearly has become a propaganda machine. It distorts the truth. It fails to report the truth. It's a propaganda machine. The government's got to keep it going because they need it in place to push their policies through. Yep. So I think it was inevitable that Jimmy Savile was a subject that still can and should blow the lid off the BBC. Yeah. Now what they're doing is they've got all the wagons drawn up in a circle trying to protect each other.
Yeah.
What about our favourite politicians? He come in here?
Oh, well, that must be yours.
Right, okay. Well, we thought we'd sort of finish 2012 on by having a look at a few things which we think are important topics, and we'll end up with good people who've been fighting to do the right things, yeah. Law and justice and truth and those sorts of things. So the man at the top, the man with responsibility for the country at the moment, has got to be David Cameron, of course, and I'm just highlighting here that here's the immediate double standards with this man, that his chum Leveson is put in post to try and control the press and the media, and baby-faced Cameron is the man, of course, who threatens the press. You had better do this because I'm telling you. But what he does, he withholds his own email from Leveson. So we know that this man is duplicitous. That's a very polite term of saying that he's up to no good. He's driving the wars overseas. He's pushing to get more arms into Syria because that's going to save lives and prevent people being maimed and killed. Sounds sensible to me. But, here he is. Let's look him in the eyes and say, this is the quality of the man that's now in charge of Britain. Is it any wonder this country's in such a state? It's pretty obvious when you come down to the simple things. Of course, we've got Nick Clegg. The thing about Nick Clegg is he's always hiding in the background. He's a sort of schoolboy, schoolgirl, benign figure, apparently. One minute he's squeaky clean. He's going to be sacked as leader of the Lib Dems. That was the headlines about 6 months ago. But now, of course, he's still doing his job. And what does he want to do? He wants to give peace prizes. Well, actually, I think he's done it now. Yeah. To all of the senior rogues who are wrecking Europe. I'm not even going to mention their names. I don't know them. I can't remember them. I'm not really interested. But let's remember that it's Britain's Deputy Prime Minister that's awarding the people who've created the utter shambles of every nation state in Europe. He's rewarding them with a peace prize. I think Clegg is very dangerous because you don't see him. He's hiding in the background. I think he is the intellect. Cameron's just the puppet. That's the Soviet system. And I'm going to add there, because we've had some contact by one or two Russian people, that in pointing a finger at the Soviet system, I'm not pointing a picture at individual Russians. I'm just going to mention that because we do pay attention to what people say to us. And of course we got this guy, young Eddie Miliband, and people wonder what this man's got in store for the country. Well, of course, he was spawned from a Marxist family. Our Russian viewers are going to have to take that hit as well. But what is he doing? He's totally supporting the Blair-Brown agenda, and of course that's what Cameron's doing. And these people are working together. One minute he's been for press freedom, and the next minute he's against. You can interject here, Patrick, at any time you want if you're feeling strong about these people. We couldn't end the year without mentioning Tony Blair. As far as we're concerned, and many other people in UK and worldwide, this man is a war criminal. He needs to be brought in front of a proper court, and we need to deal with him. But at the moment, here he is, casual, relaxed, spending £600,000 a year on his personal security, and he's still there supposedly advising and helping peace in the Middle East.
Sorry, who's spending £600,000 on his personal security?
Well, he says he is, but
in fact we are.
Well, I think it's probably us. Yeah.
So
go ahead.
It's very, I had this conversation with quite a few people during the Bush administration, whereby, especially after Bush left office and Obama came into power in early 2009, and the people are saying, why we don't need to arrest George Bush. He's not in power anymore. It's ancient history. Why don't you just let sleeping dogs lie? Well, it is very important as well that people like Bush and Blair, who did lie to the country, and in order to put us into a war and an occupation of a foreign country, because it will send a message to future leaders that they are accountable, that they are responsible, and what by not pursuing these blatant crimes, you're sending a message to the future leadership that you're not accountable, and you don't have to be responsible for what you've done, and it's an open door for corruption, really. So it is important, and it isn't ancient history; it's very new history, in fact. But yeah, go ahead.
No, well, I think that's a really good point.
Well, Blair's attitude to everything that he did was that the history books will tell the truth. Well, that's because his friends will be writing the history books. At least that's his intention. But nonetheless, this whole idea that history will be his judge rather than a court of law, that seems to be something that we need to.
Well, we'll do our best to help the process. And of course, we couldn't move on without bringing up young Gordon. Fascinating Prime Minister, really, because of course he was never elected. It was simply an agreement. You could imagine Tony Blair and Gordon Brown whining at each other, and Gordon would be saying, "But you promised, Tony, that I could be Prime Minister." So we've got this ridiculous state that this man wasn't elected. He was clearly unsuitable. He was untrustworthy. He comes into his post. He presides over a shambles, but he also sells off the gold reserves.
Yeah,
and he is another one now who's not only still out there. He's
been put in charge of education for the United Nations.
Yeah.
And that was the big news of this year. He was put in charge of education for the United Nations. So he's going to be setting the United Nations agenda for education right across the planet.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and a big feature of that, you guys, is going to be climate change propaganda in schools and literature. These are all things that are commissioned by the UN and to the tune of millions, if not billions, of dollars in the cost in terms of getting NGOs to produce these booklets and all these new bits for curriculum for schools, so that the children can believe in the mythology of man-made global warming and man-made climate change. In fact, it's that's kind of one of Gordon's chief jobs then.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be watching him closely because he's out there, and what we need to do is keep public eyes on him and what agendas he's trying to bring in. If we lump them all together, well, the expenses scandal, what I've said here is expensive scandal for Westminster. That's theft for ordinary people. And I just wanted to highlight it's hypocrisy again, but basically these people, I'm not saying the people on the front of the paper here, I'm just using that as illustrative of the whole problem, but basically had their hands in the till. Anybody else would go to prison. We've seen mothers going to prison for the theft of a few £100 or whatever it is. But these people in Westminster are getting involved in criminal activity. Does anything happen to them? No, they're actually protected. And of course you want people who've got skeletons in the cupboard because they can be controlled. And as we've continued to point out, the key control mechanism is paedophilia. So I was just, yeah, you've picked him up.
I see Ben is Ben Bradshaw's on the left. So clearly he was so busy filling in his expenses forms that he doesn't have time to help pensioners visit their wives in
No, well, we're going to talk about that. So that's the gentleman on the left of the row there. Yeah. I've just flagged up Leveson. We've already covered it sort of in the main part of the news, but I want to say that we're going to give ourselves credit for sticking with this one. Anybody doesn't like that comment, we worked really hard to make sure that what was going on behind the Leveson inquiry came to the surface. The danger at the moment is that common purpose is not, it may be collapsed. I think they may well shut common purpose down. That's to give the public the illusion that the whole thing has gone away, whereas the common purpose applied behavioural psychology, the new political social programme, is going to be done by other organisations. And of course, if this man, Little Boy Blue, can actually rule the press, and we've got text on his chin, that's unfortunate, but we won't worry about that. Basically, if he can bring in control of the press and media, we've got problems. David Bell, Sir David Bell, there's actually two of them, so yeah, we have to be careful we've got the right man, but this is him, tubby man. The newspaper headline says it all. Leveson, disturbing questions over his role and what was going on with Sir David Bell and common purpose. So whatever you read in the press about common purpose being shut down, the problem's all gone away, no it hasn't. And of course part of the evidence of what's going on is now coming out with Eric Pickles, who's berating common purpose and suggesting that basically a local authority shouldn't be spending money on it. But what is never mentioned is that David Cameron, Prime Minister, and Francis Mauders, just two examples of senior people, are actually promoting it. And our old friend Kenneth Clarke, of course, totally in the old boys network, and a very dangerous man because he is campaigning as a minister without portfolio for secret courts. So by the time we've got control of the press and media, and if he were to be able to bring in yet more secret courts with his crony judges sitting with no jury or press, we're in a dangerous position. Theresa May, yet another one, Snooper's Charter, very dangerous woman who's now set up a spying network on people. And I couldn't resist putting in our old friend Oliver Letwin. People who let go military secrets are usually put in prison, but he can do it repeatedly and nothing happens. Harriet, what can we say? Sheer hypocrisy. Here's this woman, and the right-hand side of the picture is actually her website. I recommend you go and read it. But she's boasting about having worked with Liberty, the National Council for Civil Liberties as it was, and she's helped various people. She's campaigned against government secrecy, but what she was actually doing is campaigning to make it easier for pornographic photographs of children to be taken, the onus on the parents of the children to say something's wrong, lowering the age of consent and legalising incest. And people wonder why we have problems at the moment with the state of the country. Saddam Hussein, well, we removed him pretty quickly, but he's still not out of the limelight because we've got Chris Bryant MP. We've repeated this several times, it's worth repeating. Chris Bryant MP getting his knickers in a twist because basically the Sun was paying for a picture of Saddam in his underpants. And here's Saddam, and the sheer hypocrisy is, well, here's Chris Bryant. So, you know, what sort of people are running the country at the moment? It's easy to see. Meanwhile, serious things go on in the world, and we've got this tragic headline here where a company trading boss, Chris Mahoney from Glencore, is boasting that he's going to make a killing out of the food crisis. This is a psychopathic comment, isn't it, really?
Well, this was something I heard quite often when I was working in the financial industry. Let's have a war. It's a perfect opportunity for making some profit.
Yeah.
let's kill some people. That was
Yeah.
that was a thread that ran through quite a lot of the people that I met.
This is the sort of topic which many ordinary people don't want to discuss. They know it's wrong, but they are upset by the topic. It's too hard. And I'm going to say in 2013, we've got to get some people out there. They're good people, but we've got to give them a little bit of spice to get off their bottoms and tackle some of these issues, because this is outrageous. Just a reminder of some of the key campaigns. Anne and Holly Gregg, of course, Scottish legal elite covered up the rape and sexual abuse of Holly as a Down syndrome girl. Absolutely outrageous case. Robert Greene, very brave man, coming forward and campaigning. What happens? He gets put in prison for trying to expose the abuse of children, and the government in Scotland, who presumably are very short of money, can find £500,000 minimum to help shut him up. We've had the trial of Leanne Smith, a tragic case where Leanne murdered her 2 children rather than allow social services to take them. But of course, the truth never came out in the trial about why she did it, or the behaviour of the social services people who literally hunted her to the point that she was in a state of mind she did what she did. So she is still in prison this Christmas and probably for another 30 Christmases. Meanwhile, absolutely nothing has happened to the people that lied, cheated and hounded her to a state she killed her children. And if that isn't bad enough, of course, her partner Martin Smith was stitched up in a Manchester court, which was attended by the UK column and many other people. It was rigged. He was denied key defence evidence, convicted as a paedophile, and subsequently allegedly committed suicide in prison. There's still been no inquest into Martin Smith's death. I understand that that is not going to take place until July 2013. What are they frightened of?
I seem to recall they stole all his paperwork out of his cell.
Indeed,
at the time.
The police had cleared his complete cell within a few hours of his death, and the last report UK column had is that the coroner was astounded not to have received paperwork and that evidence from the police. So it appears that the police are desperately trying to hide something. Maybe it's linked to the DNA evidence that was never presented in court, Martin's defence.
Yeah.
So on to positive things with a twist, because we wanted to give a big thank you to some of the people we think have been real stalwarts in standing up for truth and justice in UK. And we've got Stephen Aspinall here, better known as Rusty, who is one of the people that was prepared to stand up and be counted and to arrest the judge in Birkenhead, who was clearly breaking the law in the manner by which he was running the court. So here is a man who didn't stay at home sending emails. He got out there, he did the job, he paid the price and ended up in prison. But my goodness, 600 people on the streets, and a story about the state of Britain's courts which went worldwide. And he's probably going to be a little bit embarrassed, but we're going to mention also Malcolm Massey, who of course is now part of the UK column team. Malcolm presents with us, but he was also present and ended up serving some time in prison for trying to expose the sheer corruption in our courts and the fact that we have judges who now think they are above common law. And we can of course mention Robert Hayes, chairman of the British Constitution Group.
You mean Roger, don't you?
Sorry, Roger Hayes. Sorry, Roger Hayes, chairman of the British Constitution Group, in prison for defending common law after a trial in a secret court. So his story quite extraordinary. He's in a court, there is no jury, there's no press, and he's simply sentenced to time in prison.
And the court case not listed.
And the court case was not listed.
Yes.
Yeah. And if that isn't enough, then it gets worse, because here's former Royal Marine Mick Harvey, who went through the same sort of secret court, Star Chamber we're going to call it, with no jury, and he was imprisoned for simply giving his sons presents. So he serves his country, he puts his life on the line, he's decorated, and his reward is to be put in prison within a Star Chamber court. He's a great man though, and yesterday we did a 25-minute interview with a gentleman on the left, John Coles, who told us a story which we've heard a few things, but it affected us, that for 3 years this elderly gentleman has been prevented from seeing his wife in a nursing home after going through a secret court which has simply banned him from seeing his wife, and he broke down during the interview. It's available on UK Column Live. You need to see it because we need to deal with the establishment that is doing these terrible things. It's incredible, isn't it?
Well, I have been contacted, we've been contacted this morning by somebody else that has experienced exactly the same thing, and she says that she has been campaigning on this issue for 2 years now, that this is not just a single issue, this goes right across the country, where as soon as somebody makes a complaint about the standard of care in a care home, rather than them dealing with the issue that they're complaining about, they simply ban the person or get the person banned from the care home through a corrupt court system. And
so they basically imprison the person in the care home. Yeah. Yes. And of course we know the care home is a private profit-making company, and we'll be reporting more on that in due course. But do have a look at that clip and ask yourself, are you prepared to sit back and do nothing, or is 2013 going to be the year that you stand up to be counted? And here's some great people we'd just like to mention. We've got Yvonne and her husband Terry. Yvonne has campaigned for many, many years to expose the stealing and abuse of children, and she's been particularly active in Cumbria, where some disgraceful abuse of children has taken place. And of course that is the very area where Leanne Smith made the statement that when she was promoted at work, she was going to deal with the child abuse going on in the establishment. I wonder if that's why they came for her children. And Ben Fellows, well known to all of us, and of course you, Patrick. Ben Fellows, brave enough to speak out about what he knew about paedophiles in high places. He's reported his information to the police in an 8-hour interview, I think. And we wait now to see whether the police are going to do the job and start to bring in for questioning people in the political arena and the elites of society. We couldn't end really without mentioning Bill Maloney from Pie and Mash Films. He's a victim himself. He's producing fantastic, very hard-hitting films about child stealing and abuse in our so-called care system. So we're going to say to you, Bill, well done, keep going, and we believe you've got a great film coming up. And we thought we would end 2012 by giving viewers and listeners a Christmas present. And here it is. We were contacted by a person who thought we may like to know that the BBC had paid out for a false report. And I think we've got a little film clip.
Right, so this is the false report. So the false report was the report regarding World Trade Center 7 on September the 11th, 2011. And this is, if you look over this lady's left-hand shoulder, you'll see a tower block on the back there, which is World Trade Center 7. And the BBC is already reporting that World Trade Center 7 has collapsed.
So she's giving a prophecy, basically.
She is giving a prophecy. Right. Now, whether they were handed a script to read or what, who could say, but the BBC was certainly lying at this point during the day. Right,
we're going to be really clear because the BBC is reporting in advance.
Sorry, Patrick, could you just mute your mic, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Okay. The BBC is reporting in advance that a building has collapsed.
That's correct.
The building hasn't collapsed because we can see it just to the right of her head.
Just to the right of her head, over her left shoulder, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now, the Christmas present for readers and viewers is simply this. This is the case number following a complaint which a gentleman made. He asked the BBC a question: how did Jane Stanley have prior knowledge of the collapse of the Salomon Building, Building 7, World Trade Center, on September the 11th, 2001? And he said this is now on the public record from the court case of John Anthony Hill, and this has not been disputed. And in fact, he also pointed out to the BBC that basically they'd used false images in their reporting on Libya, I think it was. They'd used images from Egypt, or the other way around,
yes,
whichever it was. But he put two things into his complaint. And he stood his ground, because he said basically the BBC had broken their contract for fair, accurate, unbiased reporting. And he subsequently received this. Little bit difficult to see on screen, so I'll read it. Dear customer, please find enclosed a cheque for £24.80 in respect of a refund against payment for a television licence. Please be advised that any refund given against the current licence will result in that licence being revoked from the date of receipt of this letter. Okay, so there's a little bit of weasel wording in there, but nevertheless, the gentleman, following his complaint to the BBC about the accuracy of their reporting, received a cheque of £24.80. I pay a BBC licence fee. Many millions of other people do. And so therefore, our logic is that if the BBC has admitted guilt by paying this gentleman £24.80, the BBC owes all of us £24.80. And we wonder whether viewers and listeners will make the information available in a written form for you. But we think the time has come for licence payers to challenge the BBC over the sheer bias and propaganda of their reports. And here is an opportunity to award yourself a £24.80 Christmas present, because what's good enough for this gentleman is good enough for us.
Indeed.
Patrick, we're just about to end. Would you like to say anything to viewers and listeners to end 2012, or as an opener for 2013?
No, I'd just like to say keep up the good work, you guys at the column and everybody else who's contributing to your research and your investigations. You're doing absolutely sterling work, and I think there's thousands of people around the country who would agree with me on that point. And I look forward to seeing some positive things happen in 2013. We're hoping that the tide of freedom and common sense is going to regain some ground in Great Britain.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Have a good Christmas and a happy New Year. And we'll say the same to all of our viewers and listeners. So it's Happy Christmas and New Year from the UK column team. Just a reminder that we will be back on January the 7th, 2013. And we've got a new schedule, so programmes will be starting at 1 o'clock, and that will include Thursdays. And we're also hoping to put on an evening programme to catch people at home.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right, and just before we go, I would like to just say that for all the people that are frustrated at my tardiness about replying to emails or whatnot, I will get caught up on my emails over the Christmas holidays.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so it's goodbye for us. Thank you very much for all the support and generous donations which you've made. We look forward to seeing you in 2013, and let's get the lid off what's happening in this country, get Westminster sorted out, and get back to some normal lives. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Happy Christmas.